Hey y'all, so my name is VJohnson, and this is my instructional analysis presentation. Okay, so a brief summary of instructional context and tasks used in the lesson. So the I can statement that was placed on the board was I can solve, interpret, and analyze inequalities with real world applications. So what we were doing here is the real world application were the scales of justice. So like basically those two weights that have like the scale with the chains. I have a picture of it. And we were using the scales of justice to observe the value of the terms in the expression. So basically, what happened was, let me go to the picture. So, what happened was, I gave them some scales like this, and they had 10 and 20. And the goal was for them to slide the numbers onto the appropriate side of the scale and then place an inequality symbol in the middle to make a complete number sentence. So, this one is basically saying 20, and then in the middle, they would have had a greater than symbol, and then 10 would have been on the side that doesn't weigh as much. Now, the reason that I allowed them to convert value of number and use it in replacement of weight is because I wanted to give them a realistic idea of how the inequality scales would work. So I mean I get like 20 technically doesn't weigh more than 10, but basically what I wanted them to do is to see like the value of 20 is more than the value of 10. And so then another slide asked them to basically multiply the numbers by -1 to make it -10 and -20. And then they had to drag the numbers to the appropriate side of the scale. And so what I did here was I also flipped the scale. So this time, -10 would be on the side that weighed the most, which still kind of looks like the numbers will be in the same place here. It's just that the scale has flipped. And so the goal of the lesson was for them to observe what was going on and for them to analyze why did the weight of the numbers change? How come 20 weighs more than 10 and the positive numbers side, but when you get to the negative numbers, then -20 weighs less than -10. And so that was the goal of what they were trying to get here. And then I just gave them that real world visualization of using the justice scale so they can get an idea that when you multiply or divide by a negative number, then you have to flip your inequality sign because the value changes. So that was the goal of the lesson. Discussion of your experience with implementing mathematics teaching practices in your lesson, what practices you implemented, what was effective and what was not. So I provided 7 practices that I implemented and one that I did not implement, I did not provide here. So establish mathematical goals to focus learning. The goal was present on the board and on the task. So they knew that they were trying to just observe and interpret why the inequality symbol is flipping. What is happening with the numbers to where I need to flip my inequality sign? And they were supposed to be able to analyze that and then use the justice scales to support their thinking. And that's where the promoting reason and problem solving comes from. They were able to reason. They didn't have any problem solving in this task, but they needed to use the visual representation to reason with why does this work? So why do I need to flip this sign? And does this work every time? Let me see. Using connect mathematical representation. So they use the scales and the flipping of the scales to connect to the goal of what I was trying to get them to understand for the day. Facilitate meaningful mathematical discourse. So after the lesson, we came together. So we did individual for about 6 minutes, and then I let them work with groups for 10 minutes. We can't do more than 15 because of the whole COVID-19 policy. So I let them work in groups for 10 minutes, just trying to explain to their neighbor, why did I need to flip the sign? What happened here? They asked each other questions, and then we came together for the discussion, and I asked them some of the questions that they were asking me during their group phase. So I didn't let them ask me questions while they were working through the individual phase, but when they got with their partner, they were allowed to ask their partner the question, and if their partner did not understand it, then they could hold the question for me, and I saved all questions till it came to the discussion, which the majority of the questions that the students were asking, I had already placed on my discussion questions list because I knew that those were going to be some of the questions they were asking. I don't understand how come negative 20 is not as heavy as negative 10. And then we had to look at a number line. We looked at the value of numbers. We looked at a couple of different representations to help us gain an understanding of why negative numbers, as they increase in size, they decrease in value. That's eventually what we led to, which is how we came up with flipping the inequality symbol, because when you multiply by a negative, the value actually decreases. It's the opposite. Supporting productive struggle in learning and mathematics. So I knew that they were going to struggle on this task, and I did not give them a lot of detailed instructions because I wanted to get an understanding of how they were going to think through it. It wasn't difficult. It was only about 4 slides, but I knew that because of the lack of direction, they were going to struggle. And that was the goal, not to make them intentionally feel like they didn't understand it, but to allow them to use some of the knowledge that I knew they understood. Like, they know how number lines work. They know what a positive number is. They know what a negative number is. And they know how I just wanted them to look at all the materials and come up with reasonings without me leading them to it. So I was trying to support them, and I gave them resources. Why don't you go look at a number line? Why don't you go look at what this scale is meaning when it's flipped like this? And I allowed them to start getting in their head an idea of what was going on without just full out telling them the answer. Elicit and use evidence of student thinking. I have that highlighted because I didn't necessarily use their student thinking to power through to the next question, but I used some of their answers to one of the questions on the slides as guiding points during the discussion. So I know I could have worked on that one a little bit, especially because I wanted to put some of their work on the board, but we needed help in our vocabulary and clarifying our thoughts before I was able to put it on the board. So I just kind of took some of their ideas. And I should have actually probably given them more credit, like, student 1 said this. Can we build off of this? I think that would have helped there with showing them that I'm using their thinking. So I have, for example, I have some questions that were on the slides, and I took some student samples right here. And these were kind of the screenshots that I was posting to the board. So one of the discussion questions, how can we relate the numbers flipping on the scale to inequalities? And one of my students said we can relate the numbers flipping on the scale to inequalities because they don't equal the same thing and can easily switch with the simple multiplication. So he was just saying that the numbers, basically, as you multiply or divide by negatives, they're going to switch, and that's how the inequality sign is also flipping, because the value of the number flips as it gets multiplied or divided by a negative number. So I knew where he was going, and I'm pretty sure his peers knew where he was going, but I just felt like when they did it individually, some of it came out a little choppy, and I just didn't want to post it, and it was kind of muddy, and I confused some kids who were already struggling. So I did, like I said, put some examples of their work, but I kind of restated and reinforced exactly what I was wanting them to get from it, instead of me just reading it out and saying, like, okay, do we agree with what Ethan said here? So that's kind of how I handled that. Analysis of your teaching and students' learning. What would you do differently to improve student learning? ways you might better implement the mathematics teaching practices. So once again, the productive struggle, I felt like I said, I allowed them to struggle and I did not give them clear instructions, and I liked it. But also I have kids that don't like struggle. So of course I had some kids that immediately was like, I don't understand, and shut down. And I would like to improve on that because I want to be able to give them an entry point, but not allow them to get frustrated. Like, I want them to struggle, but I don't want them to be frustrated to the point where they reject the task. So I'm trying to find the balance with that. More engaging, attention grabbing throughout the duration of that's supposed to say lesson. I apologize. Um, I think that during this lesson, there were times where my students did not necessarily relate this to a real world task. Like, I did provide the justice scales, and we try to relate them to the scales that we see in the grocery store when we go weigh our vegetables, and that did help them to understand it and understand where the concept of weight came from. But I wanted the lesson to be like entire real world application based problem, not just I'm using this visual real world representation. Like, I wanted the lesson to kind of be like, this task is specifically designed on something that has to do with inequalities, but it's like a real world lesson. So I definitely think that I could have improved on that. And I think me improving on that portion would have allowed the kids to be more engaged. Now, this task in total took right at about 23, 24 minutes. And at the end, I did see some kids getting restless because there wasn't a real context in the problem. Also improving on my teaching and what makes it better, just middle school housekeeping. I have a lot of students that struggle, like I said, with maintaining focus. So um, just trying to train them into persevering through an entire lesson. They struggle with it individually. They can do it with a partner, but individually they'll just shut down or immediately, like, the wind will blow them to a YouTube video to watch in the middle of the lesson. So I do struggle with that sometimes. So I would like to work on that and train them to basically persevere throughout the lesson, because once you understand the concept that I'm trying to get them to learn, that reward is greater than wait until a test and not understanding anything because you chose to play throughout the lesson. And of course, I want to work on collaboration during COVID-19 because I know that in math, you really need somebody to talk to. Not saying that they can't understand these lessons by themselves, but I just really, really believe in collaborating in math classrooms, especially for my students that might not be understanding the task as easily. It's so much easier when a peer is talking to them and explaining it to them. Student teaching has been, proven to be more effective on I want to say John Hattie might have mentioned it. But anyways, I just want to make sure that they are getting a sense of collaboration. And we do have Google Meet that they can use. And we do have a couple of times where they have let us like turn and talk, but they still had to be within a 3 feet distance. And that's still a struggle with trying to keep a mask on, and they're trying to point at their screen and the kids can't really understand what their peer is pointing at. So we struggle with that. But other than that, overall, I think the lesson was really, really good. Just, I need to work on making sure, like I said, my tasks are more in depth when it comes to a real world application and not just here's a picture of something in society. So yes, that was it. Yes, have a great day.